Allô, c'est bon? Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Il me fait plaisir de vous présenter cette conférence dans le cadre de conférence midi du CRI-UGM. Avec grand plaisir, je présente professeur Simone Falk, qui est professeur agrégée au Département de linguistique et traduction de l'Université de Montréal. Il est aussi titulaire de la Chaire de Recherche du Canada en études interdisciplinaires sur le rythme et la question du langage. La professeure Falk s'intéresse particulièrement aux phénomènes rythmiques en musique et en parole et aux fonctions rythmiques en communication, en acquisition du langage et en pathologie de la parole et du langage. Elle a une approche interdisciplinaire dans ses études, combinant des méthodologies provenant du domaine des neurosciences, des sciences cognitives et des sciences du mouvement. Alors, sans tarder, je vous laisse avec la professeure Falk qui va présenter sa conférence intitulée « Le rôle du rythme dans la pathologie du langage ». À vous la parole.
Ouh là là, ne pas toucher. Il ne faut pas toucher. Désolée, je ne sais pas ce que ça fait.
Je l'ai mis à fond.
Ok. Ça va bien? Ça va? Je suis un peu petite, c'est pour ça que je voulais bien baisser un peu le microphone. Vous m'entendez bien? Ok, parfait, désolée. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Merci aussi pour l'introduction chaleureuse. En fait, je veux juste dire que je suis vraiment ravie de pouvoir être parmi vous aujourd'hui, puisque c'est ma première conférence en personne depuis le début de la pandémie. C'est un moment très, très touchant et je suis très contente d'être avec vous, bien évidemment aussi avec l'audience sur Zoom. Merci d'avoir pris le temps d'être venu aujourd'hui. Comme vous voyez, j'ai préparé cette présentation. D'abord, je l'avais préparée en français, puis j'ai changé en anglais parce que je me suis dit la dimension internationale du CRI-UGM serait peut-être mieux que je présente en anglais. Mais finalement, la discussion peut être en français et en anglais, aucun souci pour n'importe quelle langue. D'accord. Alors, aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter un aperçu de quelques recherches que j'ai fait. En fait, sur le rythme, c'est toujours la thématique comme Anna a déjà dit précédemment, sur le rythme, mais j'ai choisi un peu les aspects qui touchent un peu plus au moins les personnes adultes et aussi des personnes âgées un peu plus compatibles avec les axes de recherche du CRI-UGM, puisque vous avez vu que ma spécialisation est en acquisition. Néanmoins, puisque ma recherche concerne les liens entre musique et langage et le rythme comme un élément très, très important là-dedans, je m'intéresse à la recherche plus large aussi. Ça touche parfois d'autres aspects que juste l'acquisition, même si c'est ça actuellement mon focus de recherche à l'Université de Montréal et pour la chaire de recherche. So I switched to English. So the parts of my presentation will be the following. I will give a short intro, what I understand by rhythm in this presentation, and especially what it is good for. So sometimes it's better to go via the structure, via the functions than the structure. Then I will report on some experiments we did in collaboration with the group of Wolfram Ziegler in Munich, which some of you may know possibly, on how rhythm can foster speech production in patients with speech and language impairments, in acquired speech and language impairments. And the third part is about my current focus on speech motor disorders, neurodevelopmental speech motor disorders. So here we'll talk about stuttering, rhythm and stuttering, and with a focus on motor, rhythm and timing. And finally, I take a little bit more time to talk about, just to mention some projects, because the aim when we met with Anna and Pierre and Ville was to see how maybe our research interests might intertwine. So I have a little part on that, which is a little longer than usual. So what is rhythm and what it is good for? I start with music because it seems more obvious what rhythm in music is than what it is in speech. So here I use an excerpt of Justin London's book, Hearing in Time. So Justin London is a very important figure in music cognition. And here are some keywords that are important to us along this presentation. So rhythm involves patterns of duration that are phenomenally present in the music, and these patterns often are referred to as rhythmic groups. Meter involves our initial perception as well as subsequent anticipation of a series of beats that we abstract from the surface of the music as it unfolds in time. So as you know, music, there is a beat, yes, something that is more obvious in music than in speech, but these other keywords may apply to speech as well. So we have rhythm is about temporal structure. So this is something, temporal organization in time, which leads to grouping. So we can use these groups to package information in the musical and also in the speech domain to process them better, to understand also what it means. And finally, here the word is anticipation, but I would rather use prediction. So there is an important process behind rhythmic phenomena that enables us to predict events, upcoming events in time. So this is more like a cognitive, it's less in the structure itself. So it's like our cognitive process that enables us to predict what is coming. But this is one of the more important effects that rhythm allow us to use in speech processing, in music processing, and also to understand what the brain does when we perceive a certain temporal and rhythmic structure. So here, the transfer from this to speech. So in speech, we don't have consensus what speech rhythm really is. Yes, maybe some of you have heard about syllable time and stress time languages, and we are far beyond these simple distinctions nowadays. We are talking more about neural oscillatory processes and theta rhythms and delta rhythms and what amplitude envelope is doing in speech to our perception of speech. But I would say that what is common to speech and music, these are both hierarchically structured systems. So for speech, for example, we have vowels that are nested into syllables, that are nested into prosodic words, that are nested into prosodic phrases. And this hierarchical structure, which is interdependent, yes, has a temporal extension. So we can perceive contrasts from this temporal structure, which is then percolating to higher or lower levels, depending on what we attend to during speech. So the temporal structure is nested and hierarchical, and two phenomena are important to understand what the rhythm of speech then helps us to achieve. So first, these nested temporal elements are recurring somehow, maybe not periodically like they do in music when you have a beat to which you can clap. So we generally don't clap with speech, yes, that's not happening to us, very difficult to achieve if we ask people to do that. but they are occurrences. Yes, accents recur, important content words recur and have accentual structure. Syllables recur at a very basic rhythm, so we can predict articulatory processes. So these recurrences lead to these temporal predictions we can then use for cognitive processing, perception, and also for production. And then the other part is the variability inside and the contrast that is achieved with the temporal structure, which leads to grouping. And so we can perceive, for example, a phrase or the end of a phrase, or elements that belong together, like words that cluster together in a phrase. There's an interaction between these processes, but generally what that helps us to do, so what is that good for is, and that is my perspective in this talk, it will help us to achieve coordination with a partner. So for example, in conversation, but you could also have this in music, yes, when you're playing with someone. And generally, it's also helping to coordinate our movements. So skilled movement is something that comes from this rhythmic temporal structure and packaging, which might be important to understand what fluency in speech production might be. I just put here these little icons. So here for the speaker, for the inter-speaker coordination, we have that on any kind of level. Yes, we have a visual level, but we have it also on a neural level. So temporal processing in the brain, which is adapted between speakers, and also for the movement processes that we use for speech production. So in speech articulation, we have about 100 muscles to coordinate just to utter a sequence of sounds. And this is really complex. So with a certain rhythmic structure behind, it is much easier to get all these muscles and all these movement related aspects coordinated, as similar as to dancers who have to adjust to each other in dancing via an auditory structure. So the two questions now that I'm going to address in this talk is, first, can rhythm be used as a tool to improve or alter speech production in patients with speech and language disorders?
Sur Zoom, ça ne défile pas les vidéos.
I have a small technical problem. I'm talking about a phenomenon that we call rhythmic cueing. So what is rhythmic cueing in speech production? There are some phenomena with neurotypical populations, young adults, that show that, for example, after hearing a rhythm that matches the rhythm of the word the person has to produce, participants have reduced naming latencies. So you can somehow prime the rhythmic structure of a word so a person can articulate that or pronounce that more efficiently. There is also another phenomenon which is occurring during natural conversation. So we adapt certain aspects of the speech of our interlocutors. So, for example, participants show rate persistence, speech rate persistence, in picture descriptions when they heard a certain model sentence before. Now, this is in an experiment, but we have this in everyday conversation too, that if someone speaks fast, we go faster, a little bit faster than we usually would, because we somehow capture that in the speech of our interlocutor. So speakers adapt and persist temporal aspects of preceding stimuli in their own productions, whether speech or non-speech. And the question is, can we use these rhythmic cues as a tool to improve patient speech production?
I'm sorry, there is a small problem issue with the Zoom. So if possible, you need to unshare the screen. and reshare it to see whether it's going to work or not, because they don't. Yeah, can I try? Hello, everyone. Really sorry about this. So where is the PowerPoint? So it's there.
The newer version of Zoom, that happens quite frequently. I've seen that, depending on what you share.
Ça marche? Mais c'est bon? Parfait. Thank you. Sorry for this.
No problem. Oops. So, but now it's not going to advance here anymore. Yeah.
It does work now.
Ah, okay. Okay, great.
It's perfect.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
No, okay. We figured it out. Very good. Thank you. Okay. And the second question is, there's quite a lot of a discussion right now for in the domain of neurodevelopmental speech disorders and speech and language disorders, with an atypical rhythm, so rhythmic capacities that relate, for example, to their motor abilities, like how they clap to music or how they synchronize with music, are indicative of speech and language disorders. And this is quite a complex reasoning why this should be the case, but there has been evidence, first evidence, that there are some of these processes in dyslexia or in developmental language disorder. And in my research, I'm looking at stuttering specifically to see, and I'm going back to this in the second part of the research examples, why stuttering might show also rhythmic deficits, and not only in speech. Okay, so let's start with the experimental part. How can rhythm foster speech production in patients with speech and language impairment? General rhythmic cueing in speech pathology has been known for quite a while as an efficient tool to improve speech production. Here you see an example from the group of Manka, who reported on speaking with a metronome. So this is a German research group, that's why it's in German. But you see here the beats of the metronome, and every beat is associated with a syllable. So participants have to pronounce their words with the rhythm of the metronome, like die nächtliche Ruhe ist eine Wohltat. This is this example here. More regular than I did it right now, yes, because I synchronized to my own rhythm. And these effects have been very clear in certain populations. So we see dysarthric patients improving in speech intelligibility if they have this kind of metronome cues, especially severely affected patients, not so much the milder or moderate the affected ones. Patients with apraxia of speech show improvements in fluency and in speech rate control. Individuals who stutter are really, this is an amazing effect if people who stutter speak to metronome, so stuttering seems to disappear, and also their mode of variability is really decreasing. Other effects which are not like the metronome cueing, but which seem related, have been observed in patients with aphasia, like global aphasia, really severe cases. So in speech recovery is improving after melodic intonation therapy. Speech is improving after melodic intonation therapy, and maybe there's an important contribution of rhythm, as there's also cued speech via tapping, which comes with melodic intonation therapy. At least a group of Sonja Kotz and Stahl, they investigated these rhythmic aspects, and they concluded that this as well important as the melodic part of the melodic intonation therapy. And finally, we also see that children with hearing impairment benefit from rhythmic primes preceding their production. So their segmental accuracy increases when they get a model for their speech. all these rhythmic effects are interesting. They are not really used as therapeutic tools because you can't use them all over the in daily life. You can't speak the whole day with a metronome, even if that has been tried to do with stuttering, for example. There have been devices that have been designed to do that, but it's not so evident how to use that in daily life. Now, what we asked in our study, which was in collaboration with Ingrid Eichert and Wolfram Siegel from the EKN group in Munich, was can also speech rhythm. So we use a regular speech rhythm, not only metronome sounds or very regular sounds, to facilitate speech production in adults with acquired speech and language disorders. And what we did was we tested aphasic patients, which had either a relative pure occurrence of apraxia of speech, patients with phonological impairment, as well as patients with Parkinson's disease. These are small numbers, but we were really looking out for people who do not have concurrent dysarthria, because these co-occur very often. So we really had to seek the good participants which have not apraxia and dysarthria, or very mild dysarthria only, or other impairments. Also, memory was very important for our task. That is not so, that memory should have been very good. And we also had 24 control participants in a larger age range, so that we had a matched group. The design of the experiment was as follows. We constructed sentences with regular trochaic meter or not. So sentences in German are accent, the meter of German is accent based, not syllable based. So our trochaic meter means that you have a strong accented syllable and a weak accented or non-accented syllable. We a strong syllable, a weak syllable, a strong syllable, a weak syllable. You will have an example in a minute. And at the end of these sentences, we had target words that the participants had to pronounce after this at the end. Either they were also trochees, which meter, for example, is a trochee, that meter is the accented syllable in the first place, or iams, which are have the accented syllables at the second syllable, like device. So here you see the trial. Participants heard a beep, then they had a full sentence model of a male speaker, which was either regular in the trochaic meter or not, containing also the target word at the end. And then they reheard the sentence from a female speaker, spoken by a female speaker, without the target word, so the patient had to fill that in. So that was the production part. And you can hear the sentence in the regular meter. Could you hear it? Otherwise, we have to write it down. Could you hear it? Yes. And here is an example of. Yeah, shall I repeat it? Maybe you can hear it better. No, that's no problem. I just go for it. Nagel. Now, person had to complete the sentence. Thank you, that was sufficient. Merci, ça va. And then the irregular version, this was with the same target word, but the rhythm of the sentence was different. I don't know if you could hear it. Nagel again. Did you hear that this was more irregular than the first one? May not be so evident for non-native speakers, but yeah, the first one has the regular accents, the second one hasn't. So what happened in these patients? Just let's have a look at the patients with apraxia of speech and with phonological impairment, because we analyzed the segmental errors they did in the target word. This was not that relevant in the control group or the Parkinson's group, because they didn't have this kind of errors. You can see here the error rate in the groups with the regular and the irregular Q sentence. And here what the dot and the triangle means is that the target word with I is either a trochee or an IM. So it's a little bit complex as a figure, but what is evident from that is that all the patients made relatively fewer segmental errors after hearing the regular rhythmic sentence than the irregular sentence. This was very clear in the group with phonological impairment. So here you see the regular versus the irregular. The irregular has higher error rates. In the apraxia of speech groups, it was also the case, but the IMs were more difficult, so we didn't see an advantage for when they were pronouncing the iambic word as a target. So here is an effect that we have seen before in other people, in neurotypical people, and also in other in children with speech disorders, that a regular rhythm, whether verbal or non-verbal, can help phonological processing. That was mostly done in perception, but here we see it also in production. Yeah, we see that also this regular rhythm can help these patient groups to better pronounce the phonological structure of the word. However, we didn't find a general priming effect on the latency. So the articulation was not facilitated in a general way. We had longer onset latencies in apraxia of speech and patients with phonological impairment compared to the Parkinson's group and the control group. So there was no difference between the control group and the Parkinson's group, which is in itself interesting, but no one benefited really from the regular versus irregular cue. So we can't conclude that this might be an overall facilitation. This can be seen as more selectively addressing these phonological or phonetic planning and articulation processes. So rhythmic speech, from this study, we conclude that rhythmic speech can be a promising tool to stimulate and improve patient speech production, especially on the phonological level. Further evidence should be collected to see how that works in a larger group and also in other patient groups. The question remains whether we can use that maybe also in therapy in a more ecological way. So generally, we can't speak spontaneously with a regular rhythm. That is impossible, yeah, because it's like putting your words into this rhythm is like doing poetry all the time. So we can't ask a speech therapist to do that naturally. But maybe if we could somehow use the cues of the interactive rhythms of conversation to improve speech production, that would be a good tool to use in therapy, because it's also something people would then use in their natural environment when they go home and when they need to converse with others. So now the second part is about the rhythms of stuttering, and with a special focus on movement and timing, and maybe a very short introduction to stuttering. I don't know if you're familiar with this disorder. It's a rare neurodevelopmental disorder. I'm not talking about acquired stuttering here, yes, because you might be more familiar with that part, but I'm talking about neurodevelopmental stuttering. This is a speech motor disorder that disrupts the rhythmic flow of speech in quite an important way. So people have disfluencies that other people who do not stutter never show, or almost never. So there might be involuntary blocks. People can't initiate the word. They prolong the word, like or parts of the word, like the onset, like they say mouse, or they repeat parts of the syllable or entire words like mouse. So these are the primary symptoms. There are other symptoms associated with muscle attention, effort. Some people are so tense they have grimacing, and also a bunch of really more psycho-emotional symptoms that are related to these interruptions in speech. Stuttering is neurodevelopmental and occurring at a very early age. So most of the people who stutter have start to stutter between 2 and 4 years of age, and in the kids it's more prevalent than in the adults. So it's about 5 to 10% of kids who stutter sometimes in their life, but they lose it. Most of them lose it. 75% will lose it until adulthood, but 1% will persist into adulthood. So they will keep it. Neuroscientific findings show that there are reduced activations or connectivity in parts of the general neural timing circuits in the brain of participants who stutter. So where do we have these alterations, particularly in the basal gangliocortical circuit, and also there are different activations in the cerebellocortical circuit. So what does that mean? These are the circuits that are really linked to movement. Yes, so movement initiation, movement control, and also timing control. That is the interesting thing, that both are very, very much steered via these networks. Stuttering severity is also associated, as shown by Andy Giraud in Geneva, with altered activation of the basal gangliocortical root, particularly in the left caudate and the substantia nigra. So in the general model of speech motor control, it seems that people who stutter have problems with timely feed-forward control of speech, but with a particularity, because it is something about how they produce and perceive their own speech. So we are here at a point where auditory motor integration is particularly important. What does it mean, the feed-forward control of speech? So imagine you want to say pizza. So you have to retrieve this word and implant the motor plan for that. And there is an internal model that generates the plan, which will be forwarded to the motor system, but also it will be sent to an internal circuit that is able then to immediately predict how this word should feel and how it should sound when you produce it. That is very efficient, because you can, when you hear, before you hear saying it, you can make adjustments, because you know, oh, my articulators are not in the right position. But even when you say it and then there's some problems with the feedback that you hear, oh, I didn't pronounce that as intended, you can make fast corrections to that. So in stuttering, what is supposed to happen is that these feed-forward commands are somehow inefficient, or they are not, maybe they are not transmitted in time. And at the moment where the intended and the perceived production should be integrated, there are problems in participants who stutter, which then disturb the speech production in a way that we see that this fluency is typical of stuttering. So as all these potential speech deficits are, these speech deficits in stuttering are also seem to be connected to the general motor and timing network. We wanted to know whether motor timing generally in synchronization might be in trouble in stuttering. So this research was done with Simone from the BRAMS, which some of you may know very well. And so we wanted to see if synchronization capacities with music or musical signals are somehow altered in stuttering. Sensory motor synchronization requires a very precise coupling of sound and movement. So when you want to tap to music or to a certain beat, you need to adjust the timing of your tap very precisely with the sound. So this is only possible because it's so fast, because we generate rhythmic predictions. Hence, we were asking whether these rhythmic predictions or this process might be disturbed in children who stutter, even if it's nonverbal. We tested 20 children and adolescents who stutter in the age range from 8 to 16, and 43 age-matched controls. So what we found in that study was a first at that time. Now it's fortunately have been replicated. So children and adolescents, also adults, as we know today, are more variable and less accurate in this manual synchronization with music. 65% indeed of our relatively small group. And what does that look like? If you have, if we look at accuracy, that means how close their taps come to the event that they're supposed to synchronize with, which is this one here. The pacing event for like a metronome sound is this 0.0. And the triangles are the mean times, tap times, yes. The control group is the clear triangle, and the kids who stutter are the black triangles. So you can see that here they have an accuracy difference of, yeah, it is not that much, but the kids who stutter tap consistently more in advance of the stimulus. Yeah, that can be related to several processes behind. Yeah, that either they have really altered predictions, so they think the pacing events will occur earlier, so they tap earlier too, or they just take more time because their auditory motor integration is slower, so they take more time and they come earlier in order to be on time with the beat finally. Like a strategy, yes, that if you come earlier, you can't miss it. Which of these two things, or there may be other explanations, are true, we don't know by now. But what is also interesting is that people with, or the kids with more stuttering severity seem to get worse with these tasks. As you can see here, is the score for the stuttering severity. With higher scores, higher stuttering severity. And when they have low accuracy and low consistency, or both, their severity is more important. So these were, all the participants were tested against the control group individually because we didn't have such a large sample. And no correlation was found, but we found at least that there's a trend that is interesting to observe. And maybe in a really large group, we would find also the correlation that some of these kids are like controls, maybe even those who will lose the stuttering later. And those who persist, you can also see that these are mostly the adolescents. Yes, they are in this sample also those who have more severe stuttering. And maybe those who persist have more problems also in the general motor timing circuitry. So, just to complement these results, we found the similar results with adults. Not only we found that, but also the group of Vince Bracco, Anastasia Chaire, they found that adults who stutter also tap more in advance and are less consistent in their synchronization. And we even found that when kids are speaking to a metronome, so which is somehow interesting because this is one of the most important fluency improving conditions in stuttering. But there is something, even when they speak with metronome, where the timing is not the same as in kids who do not stutter. I maybe skip the figures here because it's a little complex and a little long, but just to say that the kids again are not as accurate or are behaving differently when they speak with a metronome than when they than the kids who do not stutter. So rhythmic motor capacities can inform us about temporal processes relevant to sensory-motor coupling and integration in stuttering. And here we want to look at, and this is already for a future study and the projects that I'm currently preparing here, what is the potential of musical or rhythmic training in stuttering? And more general, what is the link between the language capacities and acquisition and the development of rhythmic motor capacities? There should be links according to, at least from a rhythmic perspective. So some words to finish for the current projects, so which may interest you. So that is the first one is indeed the one about the musical training, which we want to implement for people who stutter, either kids or adults, and to see whether musical training and especially the rhythmic aspects can improve articulatory processes and maybe thereby improve speech fluency. And we will also observe what well-being, I mean, music and well-being is a very, very important topic. And these are still, we're not just looking at the motor part, but also at how they feel about it. And one training will be with the rhythmic serious game, so developed in the lab of Simone Dallabella. And the other will be a choir who stutters or who do not stutter, because when people who stutter sing, they don't stutter generally anymore. But this is part of a larger partnership, a grant which we got with Ryerson or Toronto Metropolitan University, how is it called now? University, so PI is Frank Russo over there. And this is an interesting network of researchers who are interested in the effects of group singing on people with communication disorders. So there is an axis for Parkinson, one for respiratory problems, one for generally aging, and the common interest, and for stuttering too, yeah. But this is the youngest groups. All the other groups are more on the aging side. But the aim of this partnership grant, which started last year only, so still open to new collaborators or people interested in that, is to see how group singing might improve certain aspects of their quality of life, of their disorder in over time. The second project I'm about to start is to investigate how the rhythms of conversations affect children's stuttering or their variability in stuttering. We know that children who stutter show altered turn-taking and temporal adaptation when they talk to their parents, for example. And here, this is a longer-term project where we want to record about, if possible, 80 kids who stutter and also 80 kids who do not stutter at the age of 4 years to assess how their variability, their rhythmic variability depends on their interlocutor. This is really about investigating after the first phase of their language acquisition, how well they can keep up with another systems of another speaker, because we suggest that at this age they are able to adapt. And we even think that the kids who stutter are more vulnerable on that side, so that we would see that the interlocutor really influences them more importantly than the kids who do not stutter, who should have a more stable motor system and who would less adapt possibly. Finally, a collaboration I wanted to mention, because my collaborator is coming to Montreal in the fall, and maybe you might want to meet her, or he certainly wants to meet you. And also a student of her is coming this summer. So this is Dr. Julia Büttner in Munich, and she's a speech therapist, and she's in clinical linguistics. And she's interested in disorders of social communication as a consequence of traumatic brain injury and dementia. So there's also Parkinson's disease in this project, and we work together on the rhythm part. If rhythm may be indicative of some discourse processes that could differ in these patient groups from people who without lesions. So I'm just skipping these. If you want to have more information about it, I can talk a little bit more, but it's really about discourse processing, inferences, pragmatic disorders, and this has a long tradition here. So it would be very nice maybe if she comes that we can sit together, or she can just visit and meet you. So thank you very much online and here in the audience for listening and according me all this time, and I'm happy to have your questions or comments. Thank you.
Very, very nice presentation, very interesting and very clearly presented. Ok, donc il va falloir vraiment bien placer la voix en haut de la tête pour parler avec le masque. Est-ce qu'il y aurait des questions ou des commentaires? Oui, Benjamin.
Merci beaucoup pour la présentation très intéressante. Une question biaisée parce que je suis en kinésiologie. Il y a un déficit moteur sur le bégaiement. Est-ce qu'il existe dans la littérature des groupes de recherche qui sont intéressés entre la quantité d'activité physique que les enfants font dans la journée et la quantité de bégaiement? Parce qu'il y a tout l'aspect cognitif, mais à la fin, la output du langage, l'iris moteur, c'est une contraction musculaire. Donc, je me demande s'il peut y avoir un lien entre le niveau d'activité physique ou les capacités du système neuromusculaire et le langage.
C'est vraiment une question super intéressante que je me suis demandé aussi. En fait, je n'ai pas trouvé des recherches de ce côté. C'est vrai que...
Pardon, oui. Est-ce qu'il faut répéter la question pour l'audience en ligne? Ok, d'accord. Non, non, pas, il y a... c'est pas de souci du tout. La question de Benjamin, c'était est-ce qu'il y a une corrélation entre l'activité motrice ou physique des enfants qui bégayent et leur bégaiement dans la journée, par exemple, leur activité motrice physiologique, est-ce qu'on peut la relier à leur bégaiement? Et s'il y a des recherches, et moi, j'en ai pas de connaissances. En fait, le domaine du bégaiement, c'était pour très longtemps très clos par rapport à l'idée que c'est un trouble de la parole fine, et c'est tout. Il ne faut pas regarder autre chose. Puis, il y avait certains groupes de recherche qui ont essayé de trouver aussi des troubles moteurs, surtout avec l'activité manuelle chez les adultes, et ça n'a pas donné beaucoup des évidences claires. Alors, ça s'était un peu arrêté. Maintenant, avec tout ce qui est rythme, et puis aussi les dernières connaissances sur ce qui se passe au niveau neuronal dans le bégaiement. Ça a beaucoup plus suscité l'attention à ces aspects-là. Mais on n'y est pas encore à ce point. Et en fait, peut-être on pourrait s'en reparler parce que moi, dans cette étude avec les enfants de 4 ans, je veux collecter quelques indices de mouvement. En fait, on voulait mettre des accéléromètres pour voir. C'est aussi, moi, je pensais selon l'interlocuteur, c'est quoi l'activation motrice chez les enfants de 4 ans quand ils écoutent et quand ils parlent. Mais bon, on a commencé un peu à mettre en place le protocole, c'est complexe. Alors, je serais très, très contente d'avoir un peu d'interaction là-dessus, comment gérer ces données, parce que ça va être des données à long terme, on va enregistrer une vingtaine d'heures, c'est beaucoup. Mais c'est vraiment très intéressant comme question. Aussi, il y a un manque, je dirais, dans la littérature, en acquisition en général sur ces aspects, comment le moteur surtout sur la motricité générale. Le manuel, ça va, c'est parce qu'il y a les gestes, la parole, ça, il y en a pas mal de recherches, je dirais, aussi avec les bébés, même les tout petits. Mais tout ce qui est plus la locomotion, je pense qu'on a, c'est peut-être Descartes quelque part qui dit ou non, ça c'est la physio, ça c'est le cognitif et le langage c'est plus cognitif, ça n'a rien à voir, c'est peut-être une double tâche à la toute fin, c'est automatiser la marche par exemple, mais on a peu d'évidence comment ça coévolue chez les enfants. Ce serait bien d'en savoir plus.
C'est-à-dire que les chants est inclus dans leur expression. En chantant. Est-ce que cette dissociation de position et de rythme adéquat fait partie de l'expression, la relation de moi, je suis là, et on oublie cette dimension de vigilance et de correcte appréciation de quels sont les rythmes, non? À l'intérieur de la pensée. Je crois qu'il y a une confrontation entre lui et l'expression tellement obligée dans le temps.
Vous voulez dire juste l'accélération dans le rythme de vie qui pourrait influencer les rythmes de communication aussi? Oui. Bah, comme vous le dites, c'est le rituel, par exemple. Je pense qu'il y a peu de place dans notre société pour le rituel, par exemple, où on utilise le chant, on utilise la danse pour être ensemble, pour être en groupe, pour aussi avoir des expériences autres que la vie quotidienne tous ensemble. C'est vraiment quelque chose qui a peu ou moins de place aujourd'hui dans les sociétés industrialisées, je dirais peut-être, hein, parce que c'est...
L'accélération peut interagir avec des processus pathologiques que l'on peut retrouver, parce que comme vous parlez de interactive rhythms et de comment on peut se synchroniser avec une autre personne au niveau du rythme. Ça, on parle de deux personnes ou d'un groupe de personnes, mais est-ce que le rythme environnant, disons en général, a été étudié comme un facteur qui peut quelque part moduler les productions, par exemple, dans le cas du bégaiement?
Ben, dans le cas du bégaiement, je dirais que oui, parce qu'il y a une des thérapies les plus utilisées avec les enfants, c'est par les parents, de leur demander par exemple, de ralentir. Je pense qu'on a ce genre de conseils, au moins aussi chez beaucoup de personnes avec troubles acquis, pour que les personnes autour...
les partenaires de communication.
C'est ça, c'est ça.
Seulement
oui.
la personne.
Oui.
Je vais laisser la parole à Benjamin qui a une question. Oui, voilà, oui, c'est m'excuse. Voilà.
Merci pour votre présentation. Très, très intéressant.
Est-ce que tu peux essayer de parler un peu plus fort et un peu plus longtemps parce que la discrimination, c'est
D'accord, entendu.
ça va. Oui.
Je concernant un phénomène qui s'appelle l'électricité. Je me posais est-ce que les personnes qui ont bégaiement ont un certain niveau d'électricité? Il y a une relation entre les deux, car le fond de ma pensée, c'est de me dire que peut-être que ces personnes qui ont bégaiement n'ont pas forcément une bonne intégration des signaux physiologiques musculaires, un peu en rejoignant ce que disait tout à l'heure Benjamin, une bonne intégration cérébrale des signaux musculaires, ce qui fait qu'ils n'ont pas forcément conscience et que ce qu'ils essaient de prononcer comme mot sort un petit peu difficilement. Et typiquement, c'est le cas des personnes qui sont aléxiques, qui ont une difficulté d'intégration des ça se voit. Ils sont aussi reconnus comme étant assez maladroits parce qu'ils ne font pas forcément très attention où sont les membres de leur corps dans l'espace, la proprioception. Et je me demandais si, par hasard, ce ne serait pas un facteur qui serait associé à ce type de pathologie. Et si, dans ce cas, si c'est associé, une possibilité interventionnelle, c'est de jouer sur cette capacité à mieux prendre conscience de ces signaux physiologiques, et notamment des signaux des muscles moteurs du profession, pour derrière améliorer le bégaiement. Voilà, c'était plus dans cette question-là.
Je ne sais pas le terme exact comment. Alexithymie. Alors la question c'était si les personnes qui bégayent auraient éventuellement une alexithymie, une mauvaise conscience de leurs propres signaux physiologiques quand ils parlent, au moment où ils parlent ou en général, c'est ça?
En général,
oui.
Qui est relativement ignorable dans le temps et qui, sur le long terme, peut éventuellement
alors, j'ai spontanément pas de connaissance de recherche qui se dirigent vers cette direction-là. C'est sûr qu'il y a eu des recherches sur, par exemple, qu'est-ce qui arrive quand il y a une perturbation, quand on met un bloc dans la bouche. Comment les personnes qui bégayent réagissent par rapport aux personnes qui ne bégayent pas, ou aussi, il y a beaucoup d'expériences sur l'intégration du feedback auditif qui est déficitaire, dans un sens que il y a un délai temporel là-dedans qui fait en sorte, ou quelque chose qui est moins efficace et plus ralenti. Pour vraiment répondre à la question, je ne connais pas des approches en thérapie qui utilisent, je sais qu'il y a beaucoup d'approches qui utilisent vraiment des thérapies de relaxation, par exemple des muscles, parce qu'il y a cette tension élevée dans le corps qui provient du bégaiement ou aussi du stress que ça impose à la personne, mais je ne connais pas de thérapie spécifique à ce que vous suggérez. Ce serait intéressant de voir s'il y a des éléments qui pourraient référer à cela, et aussi s'il y a un déficit dans ce domaine qui pourrait être relevé. C'est
intéressant parce que je pense que vous avez parlé à un certain point des enfants qui souffrent de bégaiement et qui ont de la difficulté à vraiment percevoir comment programmer, disons, la parole. Est-ce qu'il pourrait avoir une composante de proprioception en plus de la composante rythmique en général? Est-ce qu'il pourrait avoir une composante de proprioception dans le monitoring online de la programmation de la parole?
Oui, tout à fait. Ça ressemble à ça. Hein? Ça ressemble que c'est vraiment… Parce que si les personnes qui bégayent ne s'entendent pas, parce qu'il y a du bruit, parce que c'est masqué, ou parce qu'ils sont… Aussi quand ils ont, par exemple, la tâche de parler comme quelqu'un d'autre, où il y a beaucoup d'attention à comment il est fait, le bégaiement souvent se réduit ou disparaît même. Alors, il y a certainement des éléments qui, dans le monitoring, qui sont décisifs pour que ça arrive. Ce n'est pas uniquement l'articulation en soi-même, c'est l'intégration de leur feedback, de ce qu'ils reçoivent de leurs propres paroles, mais potentiellement avec l'interaction avec les autres. Moi, je pense toujours que c'est un élément important qu'il faut regarder aussi, comment les autres influent ce processus.
En interaction avec quelqu'un d'autre. Et c'est pour ça que ce concept que vous avez présenté de rythme interactif me semble très intéressant, et en tout cas, on s'en parlera. Je vais laisser. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres personnes qui veulent poser une question? Vas-y. Non, vas-y.
Intéressant le bégaiement, vais faire face à des situations différentes. Et je n'ai pas du tout de problème, par exemple, en lyrique, dans la coordination, quand je suis. Donc, je joue beaucoup d'instruments. Je suis très bien en musique, en danse, en coordination, etc. Mais ce que j'ai remarqué, je pense que quand j'écris, il y a certaines lettres, il y a certains mots où ce n'est pas aussi fluide que les autres mots. Et j'ai l'impression que c'est un peu similaire à la parole, par exemple, je bloque sur certaines, par exemple, lettres, et c'est la même chose sur l'écriture. Donc, je pense que ça serait une bonne piste pour vous si vous voulez voir, par exemple, la motricité en lien avec le bégaiement ou bien la planification motrique. Je pense que ça sera plutôt là le plus intéressant plutôt que la locomotion, parce qu'en locomotion, je pense il n'y a pas vraiment de grands problèmes, par exemple en marche, ou bien quand on chante, je n'ai pas de souci quand je suis seule de parler en même temps. Donc, je pense peut-être plutôt la planification motrice en amont, c'est ça plus qu'on pourrait peut-être chercher.
Merci beaucoup pour cette suggestion pertinente. Merci.
Je pense qu'une dernière courte question, parce qu'il faut qu'on termine. Vas-y.
C'est que Madame m'a mentionné la proprioception. Qu'il a beaucoup à voir avec la faiblesse de prendre le rythme dans l'expression a posteriori, et vraiment est sous pression. Par exemple, les harmonies de son pourraient être devraient précéder la pratique de la phonation. Et cette dimension proprioceptive, on l'avait bien mentionné, est en faute. Il y a quelque chose dans l'ambiance de l'enfance qui accélère le processus et on est sans les ressources pour le propre rythme qui fait partie de la rhétorique. On n'utilise plus la rhétorique dans les universités, non? Et au passé, c'était une science à suivre.
En fait, Démosthène était une personne qui bégayait.
Quand il chante, il ne bègue pas, non?
Non, très peu. Très peu. Chez beaucoup de personnes, ça réduit dramatiquement, comme vous l'avez déjà dit aussi, le bégaiement. Ouais.
Une petite question à propos du substrat neurofonctionnel ou neurophysiologique. Est-ce qu'on a étudié des réseaux, vous avez parlé brièvement, des réseaux qui participent au processus de programmation de la parole et qui sont atteints au niveau de la connectivité, les personnes qui bégayent. Mais est-ce qu'on a étudié, disons, le rapport entre ces réseaux, par exemple, et la charge attentionnelle? Parce qu'en fin de compte, il y a aussi la question des ressources disponibles.
Oui.
Est-ce que vous voulez commenter un peu par rapport à cette interaction entre le bégaiement, l'attention et d'autres processus?
J'ai réfléchi si j'ai une étude à la main.
En général, si vous n'avez pas la trace, ce n'est pas important, mais votre opinion par rapport à l'interaction entre les processus stricto sensu de programmation de la parole et la surcharge cognitive en général.
Oui, en fait, peut-être un élément intéressant qui est toujours lancé, cette histoire qu'il y a implication du circuit impliquant les ganglions de la base. Ça a été lancé, ça fait pas si longtemps. On ne s'intéresse pas au sous-cortical depuis tellement de temps, mais c'était Per Alm, un chercheur suédois qui lui aussi une personne qui bégaye par ailleurs, qui a toujours poussé le domaine un peu. Et lui, il a dernièrement aussi publié ses réflexions sur la variabilité du bégaiement dans une perspective dopaminergique. Et de ce côté-là, en énumérant toutes les fonctions que la dopamine a aussi dans notre circuit, dans la programmation des émotions et d'autres éléments vraiment importants, et avec l'idée que l'automatisation de la parole qui passe aussi par, dans les stades très tôt chez les enfants, qui passe éventuellement par les niveaux de neurotransmission qui sont justement observés, et qu'éventuellement il y a un déséquilibre dans ces phases quand c'est important d'automatiser la parole, que le bégaiement va s'installer. C'est ça son hypothèse. Oui, c'est justement quelque chose pour le futur. Il y a eu des études sur la dopamine, surtout chez les personnes adultes, bien évidemment. Alors, on ne sait pas trop ce qui se passe au niveau des neurotransmissions pendant le développement. Mais je pense que ça va être quelque chose qui va être poursuivi et peut-être qui pourrait répondre à cette question-là. Merci.
Alors, merci absolument pour votre
Merci.
participation. Merci aux gens qui sont en ligne. Je ne sais pas où vous êtes. Et alors, mes applaudissements.
Non, avec plaisir, ça fait plaisir.
C'est vraiment super. C'est vraiment super. Donc,